Hey there, I'm Lainey Lipsky, parenting coach and master teacher. Parenting is hard. I totally get it, and I'm here to make it easier for you. Especially if you had a tough childhood or you've got a tough child now, I've got your back. So take a deep breath, relax, and check out this clip from my coaching group this week. And remember to hit like and subscribe if you like my vibe. Let's get started. And a lot of times, what happens is that the person who is the, let's just call designated default parent, it's not always the mom, although it often is, but there's usually one parent that is taking on the emotional decisions of the family and carrying sort of the emotional burden of the family. And I use the word burden very carefully because when the process is not addressed and the stress that's related to that is not addressed, it does start to feel like a burden. And that's when parents can feel overwhelmed, resentful, frustrated, and downright grumpy. So, what happens with emotional overload is I can give you any number of examples. I'm sure you would relate to a number of them. But let's just talk about the process of deciding what you're going to make for dinner or what you're going to serve for dinner on any particular night. If you're like most people, you are thinking about what is going to be nutritious for your kids. You're going to think about what you might like to eat, and you're thinking about what also your kids are going to like to eat and what you want to introduce them to and what's affordable and what's easy enough to make, right? So something as simple as just putting dinner on the table really requires a lot of steps. And that's the first step is thinking about what is everyone going to like. So there's the meal planning. Then you go from meal planning to actual um, making a list of the ingredients that you need to buy. And then you go from that to actually planning your shopping trip, going shopping. If you're taking little kids along with you, that's a whole rigmarole that you need to go through. There's choosing the things at the supermarket. There's looking at pricing. There's looking at ingredients. There's making decisions all along the way. Then there's getting home. There's unloading the kids if you brought them with you, unloading the groceries. And that's even before you've started making this one meal, right? Then there's starting to make the meal. There's washing everything and prepping it, right? Then there's cooking. And then, of course, there's serving it. And then there's cleanup. All of that process goes into that one act of just serving a meal. And what happens a lot of time is when one parent is taking on the majority of this kind of decision making and this kind of process, the other parent is not noticing all the things that go into making that decision. They just notice the outcome. They notice what's on the plate for dinner, for example. You can extend this, what I just described, to any situation. Thinking about a vacation, thinking about if you're maybe hiring somebody to clean your house, you're thinking about anything that you already have in place, all of the steps, anything that's kind of behind the scenes that has multiple steps attached to it, that's what I'm talking about. The things in our lives and in our parenting lives in particular that create this emotional, invisible stress around it. So the same goes, by the way, for the parent. If one parent is staying home and one parent is going to the office, it goes for the parent who's going to the office or working outside the home, the things that that person may do to take on their share of the work of the family, right? Paying the taxes, taking care of taxes, taking care of health insurance, all the things that require lengthy processes that go unnoticed and create an emotional tax, an emotional toll on that person. And I just want to call this out because a lot of times parents and people who are, and I'm going to pause here and say there's also a third category of the single parent who makes all these decisions by him or herself and is feeling totally maxed out. Or maybe you're in a marriage or a partnership where you feel like you're often operating as a single parent, right? Maybe your partner travels all the time or is deployed. And so this emotional burden, this emotional load falls on you. And what happens over time is that when the process isn't acknowledged by the other partner or even by yourself, if you're the one doing it for yourself, is that we can start to take these things for granted. We can start to get frustrated with the person who's not um, the other person who isn't, we don't understand maybe their whole process in how they've come to giving the final product. So maybe the meal isn't really to our liking, for example, sticking with the meal analogy or example, right? So if we're not appreciating what that person did, all that person did to put that meal on the table, and instead we're just commenting on the negative, how the meal could be better or what we don't like about it, then that not only makes the person feel bad about the meal that they're serving, but all the work they did leading up to it, which it's not a big leap to understand why that person might feel resentful, might not want to cook anymore, or might not want to clean or do the laundry or whatever if there is not an acknowledgement of all the steps that are going into it, right? So I read an article about this a long time ago, and the woman who was writing the article was talking about how for Mother's Day, all she wanted was for her house to be deep cleaned. And it wasn't that she just wanted it to be deep cleaned, she wanted the outcome. But what she really wanted, she had three kids at the time, three young kids at the time. She still has three kids, but three young kids. All she wanted her husband to do was to do the amount of work putting that goes into finding somebody to do a deep cleaning so that he would understand what it means when she is doing a task at home for the family. So he actually offered, in this story she's telling, he offered to do the deep cleaning himself. He's like, no big deal. Like, it's probably pretty expensive. I'll just do it. But she was then left taking care of the kids all day long on Mother's Day. And what she explains in this article is that it's hard to have this conversation without seeming resentful or without seeming entitled, because what she really wanted to try to get across to her husband was that in being asked to do something, right? You are being asked to actually do a whole bunch of other things. So the gift to her would have been for him to do the research, right? To look up on Yelp or Angie's List or whatever person to help out with this, maybe to ask some friends on Facebook, maybe to ask somebody else who's had an experience of hiring somebody successful before, having the conversation with the person, pricing it out, all the things that if you've ever priced something out before, really investigated something, you know that it's a process to get somebody to help you to, the degree that you're comfortable with at the price point that you can afford, that you want to pay, right? So even though her husband ended up doing the deep cleaning, the article that I was reading was really about her feeling resentful that she was left with the kids. He didn't take on the emotional load of figuring it out. And on top of it, she ended up seeming ungrateful because it wasn't really the gift of the peace of mind that she had been looking for. So it's really important to understand how this operates in our family systems, whether it's in your marriage or with you and your kids, like, or you're just with yourself, understanding that emotional overload when you are making all these little decisions and figuring all these things out can really lead to frustration, resentment, and overwhelm. So a couple of suggestions that I have around, is it, first of all, is this something that you can even relate to? Like, do you feel like there are things, I have a few people with me, is this something that you relate to, that you've experienced before, that it seems like it's one thing, it's one decision on the surface. Let's just say it's finding the baseball team for your child to play on, or the swim team for your kid to swim on. But it really requires a lot of back work. It really requires a lot of research. It really requires a lot of phone calls and following up and tryouts, that kind of thing. Does anybody relate to that? You can give me a thumbs up or you can write a comment. Um, it creates this feeling of heaviness around parenting because it doesn't free us up to then have the bandwidth, all of the bandwidth to do things like playing with our kids or having the energy to play. And it's something that I think operates under the surface, that when we call attention to it, actually is helpful. It's helpful to have a name for this and to say, oh, that's emotional overload, or I'm carrying the emotional load here of this particular decision. And it's a really big deal. You think about, how much you look into summer camps for your kids or after school activities and finding the right one at the right time, at the right place. Like, it's not a simple decision. So the thing that can keep us trapped in a place that doesn't necessarily work for us or scenario that doesn't work for us is that we know that if we choose to leave, let's say a team, or we choose to fire a babysitter, or we choose to leave a school that maybe we went through a process to get into through an application, right? If we are leaving that, we are choosing to take on the next emotional load of finding the new thing. And that's where, if you've ever felt resistance around leaving something that you know isn't good and starting something new, this concept of emotional load is something to understand so that you can understand what gets in the way of your choice making and your decisions to leave certain things that aren't working out for you or for your family. What can you do about it? Well, a couple of things. First of all, you can try as much as possible to limit the number of decisions that you're making once you actually make a decision to try something. So once you make a decision, probably a well-researched decision of what after school activity your child's going to do or what baseball team they're going to be on, try to then limit the number of decisions after making that. So it's kind of on autopilot as much as possible. The other thing that I recommend doing is to make sure, if you have a partner, to make sure that whatever decision is being asked for you to make, whether it's about a vacation or something that seems like it should be fun or, it seems like you should be grateful for, make sure that your partner understands how much work goes into that process. And it's not just coming out with the beautiful outcome, right? So that your partner can develop an appreciation for the work that you're doing behind the scenes. And the third thing I recommend is that if you do have a partner, if you are married or in an other partnership, that you make sure that you are recognizing and appreciating your partner for all of the behind the scenes work that he or she does as well. To say to your partner, wow, like I know that somehow, we have health insurance or somehow we get our taxes paid every year and you do that. Like I see the outcome, but I'm sure there's a process behind that that I'm not aware of, if that's the case in your family, or you take care of the dinners and oh my gosh, like I'm really thinking about where this comes from and I'm so grateful. That's my dog, sorry. I'm so grateful for you for doing all of that and to recognize I don't always know what it takes and I don't always know what I'm asking you to do. Just to bring this idea to the forefront is a really helpful way to bring you and your partner closer together. And if you are a single parent, it is really important for you to pat yourself on the back and to acknowledge all the work that you do to make these decisions, big and small. Our brains don't really um, notice a difference whether we're making a big decision or we're making a small decision. Any decision that we're making and we're putting thought and effort into it is taxing to our brains. Something that is really important to do is to pat yourself on the back and to make sure that you're acknowledging all the work that you're doing to make these decisions for you and for your kids, and to give yourself a break and to try to limit the number of decisions that you're making in any particular day. It's very taxing for our bodies to keep making decisions and to keep going down the rabbit holes and to look into all of the options and try to keep things as simple as possible. I really hope this video was helpful to you. Feel free to share it and use the comments to ask a question or to request a topic for the future. We've got links below for free support with things like discipline, teaching your kids how to be more gritty, and how to be more patient with your kids, plus access to my free coaching group. So be sure to check those links out. And remember, we get one shot at parenthood. Our kids only get one shot at their childhood, so let's make it count. Click like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.